I wanted to ask something. What is the way to protest in a creative way when one has a different opinion? How can go creatively and not in a destructive way?
Already to have this consideration is going in the right direction. And it's to be understood very carefully, because protest in the game of the world is a way to bring a greater understanding, a greater perspective. It is a part of interaction, and it is very valuable and healthy. But one has to understand that we are in a very delicate situation when we are going into the game of the duality, because there we have both the possibilities. We can be going in a creative way, but we can also be going in a destructive way. We can be going in an intelligent way, but we can also follow certain patterns of reaction blindly. So the question is, are we going wakefully and consciously? Are we going with the right awareness? And I say right awareness because it is not just being aware of what is happening outside, it's just also looking what is going on inside, from where our reaction processes are arising, being in touch with them. This is what gives us the possibility not to get trapped, not to get lost in unconscious, hate-based, anger-based, aggressive, destructive reaction processes. And for that it will be valuable to understand something very much more deeper. We are used to a way of looking at things in opposites. And that is how it is in the life process, in the game of the duality. But we also need to understand the nature of this duality. For example, light and darkness, they are the opposites. And we need the polarity to be in the game of the world. So far, so good. But in order to remove darkness, if you go into fighting against the darkness, if you get more aggressive, if you go on shouting, if you go on shooting, it is not a way to deal with it. We have to bring attention to the light. And in a similar way, the so-called struggle between the good and the bad. We think that there are good people and bad people. Yes, on apparent level you can, on certain situations, categorize people on the peripheral state because they manifest certain things in a certain way. But deep within, when you look and understand life more carefully, then you see that the so-called bad is one who is not deeper in touch with the reality. Because deep within, everyone is good. Deep within, everyone is innocent. Deep within, everyone is part of the mystery of life. And this is what I found about this little information once I was getting about this African tribe called Himba. When they have somebody who is doing something bad, something which is unsensible, which one would call criminal, they don't go into punishing and condemning and damning this person. They bring the person to the middle of their gathering. Of course, you have to understand they have a deeper background to it, because in their background, every child is born with a song. And the mother prepares, or mother waits for the song before she even conceives to get the child. So it's a very deep culture, But there is a society which is understanding something very basic. So when someone does something wrong, everyone gathers. This person who has been unsensible or destructive or disbalanced is brought to the middle, and everyone starts singing the song of the soul of this person. And this is very significant, because when you are in touch with your reality, because being in touch with yourself means being in touch with the reality in its wholeness, in its deeper sense. How do we lose the connection to reality? We lose the connection to the reality when we are so much preoccupied with our idea of being separate. That's what is called the ego. When we are caught up in our conditioned way of looking, projecting through that, we don't connect to the wholeness of the reality. We are only preoccupied with what I want, what I don't want, what I like, what I don't like, what is my concept, what is my belief. We don't consider the wholeness of the situation. So this is very, very important to understand it, because when you are in touch with yourself means when you are in touch with the reality, when you are in touch with the wholeness, when you are not preoccupied with that what you project through your conditioning. And this is what makes all the difference. Otherwise, it is believing that there are bad people and we fight against the so-called bad, or we have to find ways to change the periphery. But it is not changing the periphery which will make the difference. It is bringing understanding. And the more you are considering it carefully, the more it will become clear that what you are protesting against is not just the persons. The persons are representing in that moment, but your real barrier, your real oppositioner, your real opponent is the blindness, is the unconsciousness. When somebody is deepening their understanding, that is why I put it in this way. There is no good and bad people. There are people whose understanding has deepened and whose understanding has not yet deepened, who are still caught in one-sided ways of looking. Once this becomes more clear to you, you see that hate is not the basis. Hate is a helpless reaction coming out of our own unconsciousness, our own entanglement. Anger, revengefulness, violence is not an answer. It is automatic reaction patterns which are more coming from our entanglement in the peripheral way of looking. It is more like the animal reacting in certain level. But that way we don't become human, that way we don't become capable to help each other. When we react to somebody's insensibility through anger, hate and violence, intimidation, and exploit the other, what we are doing is pushing each other more and more into a state of blindness. And through that we don't help in a deeper sense. Peripherally maybe we can bring certain changes, but that is not going to be of deeper value. That is not going to be really healthy. Because the other is just waiting for the opportunity to fight back. The other is more trapped in the hurt feeling, anger. So both are supporting each other's unconscious process. And this is why it is very important to understand that protest should not become a blind reaction. It should not be based on hate. It should not be based on anger in a blind level. It should not be based on a tendency to throw out the aggression and violence. It should not be just to provoke and control and manipulate the other. It should not be to exploit the other. It should be with your awareness. And this is not easy. That is why very often you see in the protests, when one provokes, one gets into violence, one party gets into violence, and the others react. And so things don't really move in a healthy way. Protest has to be very intelligent. I found sometimes these protests some protest actions from the Greenpeace movement, very creative, very valuable, because they were not trying to destroy, they were not trying to go with anger and proving who is right and in a destructive way. They were just bringing attention to certain aspects. And that is why there has been a lot of beautiful developments happening through that. But again and again, we have an individual responsibility. And our individual responsibility is not to go into this unconscious process and letting it overtake us. Otherwise, we are manipulating ourselves and letting ourselves get manipulated from the others. It's a blind interaction. And how do we get manipulated? We get manipulated on two factors: the unconscious fear and greed. So, those who want to go into protest should really take a deeper responsibility. Remember to stay in touch with themselves, confront the issues which are coming up in them, and with that basis, when they answer to the challenges, they are not trying to manipulate anybody, they are not letting themselves get manipulated by those who are unconscious in their group or in another group. So it is a very, very delicate thing. And the challenge is also because once you get into a kind of mass reaction, you are going totally on this political way of taking party. We are this group and they are that group. And so it is more like enemies fighting against each other in a war. Who is strong? Who can overtake the other? So it becomes almost automatically pulled into this direction of violence, destructivity. Then you become unsensitive to what you are doing, because it's very easy to destroy, it is very easy to hurt, it is very easy to miss the point. What you are maybe standing for, what you are wanting to bring into attention, may be something very valuable, but you have to understand it in the right way. And that is why people like Mahatma Gandhi or Nelson Mandela, or in the American situation, Martin Luther King, they were not for violence. They were going with a spirit of consciousness, a spirit of sensibility. And this kind of protest is very, very significant. But let us see that a little bit more deeply and carefully. We are in a period of the world where we can, as individuals and as a whole, allow the understanding to go deeper. Also the scientific developments and also the whole possibility that we can come in touch with other cultures, with other ways of thinking, other streams of social behavior. We see that just like we all can have the nourishment from different kind of food, whether it is French food, Italian food, Chinese food, Indian food, Mexican food, there are so many possibilities. And when you understand it rightly, you see that they are not against each other. They are all part of the variety, the diversity of life. So it is also consciousness deepening when we learn to face the diversity and see that our approach should not be from the belief that what I think and what I believe is the ultimate absolute. That our own way of looking is one way of looking. And for that you have to also become aware that everyone is projecting through their conditioning, through their past, through the positive and negative experiences which they have made and the standards and values which they have acquired. So it's a very challenging situation, but this is the individual challenge. This is that what we need to take care. That we cannot blindly go into a destructive process in the name of protest, and we don't use the protest as a way to have a catharsis and to indulge in anger and violence. That is self-destructive. That is going against the purpose what you may be deep within having in your heart. So intelligent way of protesting is also a creative and peaceful basis. Even if sometimes you may have to be loved in your expression, even if sometimes you may have to be very intense in your expression, but still it should not be an unconscious, blind way of throwing out anger, hate, revenge, intimidation, exploitation. It should not go in that direction. It should be a conscious way of looking. What is the way to bridge? What is the way to bring the understanding? And then you see that both the parties need to bridge to each other through their creative considerations. Otherwise, sometimes I feel very sorry for people who get overtaken by what they want to bring out, and then those who are responsible to keep the law and order, and they have also their responsibility. They are also trying in their way, and both are fighting against each other, but both are hurting each other. They are not understanding the situation. They have to look how to create bridges, how to bring understanding. And this is a deeper work. This is not just political manipulation. And for that, it is necessary to recognize that it is the time to go beyond the approach of force, approach of power, approach of imposing things into a softer, heartful way of consideration, including. The human societies have been working more or less on this approach of forcing, approach of manipulation, except in certain smaller tribes, smaller cultures. The moment it becomes a huge movement and mostly on the basis of unconscious way of reacting, it is what you can observe in the world. There are many countries where suppression, manipulation, control by those who are in power, those who have come in one way or the other to the power. And if you don't understand that power has to be used in service of life, power has to be used to serve and not to exploit. And why is it so? It is not just a moralistic thing I am talking, because the reality is, as you look and experience deeply, a deeply interconnected reality. Even though on appearance level, there is all kind of differences. In a deeper sensibility, you will realize it's all arising from the same source. That is why the non-dualistic basis has to be the orientation. That is the meaning when people, those who are understanding and seeing more deeply, are reminding, go in a compassionate way, consider carefully, bring your intelligence. Don't let yourself get pulled blindly into negative processes. Because negativity, which is human, it comes up in us, but we have to see that we as human beings have to rise above it by learning to use our intelligence, learning to use the capacity in us to understand. Otherwise, we are remaining on this unconscious animal level. And that is very unhealthy for a human being. What is okay for the animal is not okay for the human being, especially now. You can see that. Because we have so many ways to destroy. We have so much potential. We have accumulated power in different ways. That is why anybody who wants to be destructive, they can be very easily destructive. People get any guns and shoot around. People just hijack airplanes and destroy. So it's all very delicate. And there are politicians who have lots of power, and with all these destructive weapons, which are mass destruction, going into a crazy state, they can misuse all this. And it's all war approach is misuse, because that's not understanding the nature of our reality. We are in a state in the world, we are in a state in the humanity, we are in a state in the development of the earth where we have a chance to be healthily together only when we basically shift from the approach of force and violence and condemnation and intimidation and exploitation and manipulation into an approach of bringing understanding, an approach of creative communication, an approach where you attempt in all different ways with your creativity, allowing the intelligence to respond to the situation from a state of inner clarity and peace. That is what is needed. Because just to go on blindly into reacting, to shout, to be angry, to feel right, feel justified, to hurt the other, it comes easily. But that is not the answer. That is only an unconscious reaction. And we all are individually responsible, because each one is contributing into the manifestation of the life process. So become aware. It is not easy, because it's easy to go into the blind reaction. You don't need to do much. It comes automatically. The inner automatism, which is bringing these animal reaction processes, pulls you into it. But we become human when we observe these processes, consider, bring the capacity of intelligence, look through the sensibility of your heart. And these are only, in other words, saying, when you start looking at the reality without getting trapped in the projection through your conditioning, when you start looking without getting trapped in the egocentric way of seeing things, when you start seeing the reality the way it is, because that's what it's all about. When you are based on yourself, on your reality, on the consideration of the wholeness, your answer, your protest will be very, very valuable, because it's not against human beings, it's against the blindness in oneself and in the other. And that is a very, very important difference, very basic difference. Otherwise, we have so much capacity to destroy, and destroying can happen so easily. It doesn't need much intelligence. Anybody can just get into some kind of anger and unsensible state and go on reacting. Many people are going sometimes amok every year, in almost all the countries, especially in the West. It's almost a kind of blind reaction. The more power, the more pressure. One has to try to understand the phenomenon of all this carefully and see that it is all a question of, are we considering life more carefully? Are we considering the reality more deeply? Are we understanding ourselves and each other more deeply? So it is a question of deepening the understanding through learning to consider, learning to look beyond the blind unconscious projection into a way of looking more wakefully, being in touch not only with what is happening outside, but that what is happening within you, that what is undercurrently working in you. Because often behind the anger, behind the revengefulness, behind the impatience, behind the fear, there are factors of our desires, our concepts, our feeling of insecurity, our clinging to certain beliefs. One has to let all these things become more conscious to oneself. Because when you are having some advantage through the insensibility and through certain approaches, then holding to these advantages, clinging to these conveniences and what you have, you may not look what you are doing to the others, what is happening through that to the whole surroundings. So you have to be very honest with yourself. You have to be very plain to face what is taking place in me, from where I am arising, what are the factors which are provoked in me. And it is not trying to judge and put yourself down and changing anything in a superficial way. It is really learning to get inwardly disentangled from the blind reaction process, so that you are able to answer from a state of clarity and intelligence without letting yourself get trapped in the blindness and provocation from anywhere. So protest is part of a creative way to communicate, and in so many ways you can bring out your opinions. Sometimes, depending on the kind of situation, you have to find different ways, but you have to consider, you have to be very careful, you have to be very responsible. It's very easy to blame, it's very easy to justify. You can justify all kind of things, all kind of insensibility with our logical process. So that's not the point. It's not how much arguments you have. It's a question of, are you really honest with yourself? Are you plain with yourself? Are you looking at that what is taking place in you? And are you in touch with the reality in this kind of conscious way? And then going into answering to the challenges of life. Then you can see that life is also a certain interplay of the dualistic manifestation and the non-dualistic essence. When you are coming in touch with the reality in a deeper way, you have peace, you have silence, you have clarity, and there is joy, there is understanding, Spontaneously there is compassion, because you start seeing the different traps everybody can get into. So you don't fight blindly and go into destructive ways. You will become instrumental in bringing about understanding and love. And that is patient process that requires lots of courage and sensibility, but that is what will make the difference. So those who really want to go in a healthy way of protesting, they have to take responsibility for themselves in this way, and that will be very valuable.